says going live. Do I believe it? I do. All right. All right, there we are. Okay. I'm going to do that. Exodus 23, verses 6 through 9. It's kind of a part 2.5, part 3 from the lesson from the last couple of weeks. It's a follow-up to much of what we've been discussing already. Not just in Exodus 23, but with regard to the application of law in general. Exodus 23, 6 through 9. Nearly everything in our text this morning is a recap of something we've talked about previously after we've left the Ten Commandments. There's one exception to that. Morning, Dusty. But there's one exception to that. We're going to talk about the issue of bribes, and God is generally displeased with bribes. But everything else in these several verses are going to be a recap of what we talked about several weeks ago. There's a lot of repetition. So, did I do this right? There we go. Repetition. Why is there so much repetition? You'll see all of it in a minute, but let's talk about the purpose of repetition first of all. Why do we have so much repetition?
It's important. Learning.
It's important. It's learning. So again, reminders. You guys are just reading my notes here for the most part.
I used to have an instructor that when he said, remember, that was something that was important. It was probably going to be on the test. And you really needed to remember that.
Exactly. It's important. It's something that needs to be repeated because repetition is a wonderful instructor. It will cause us to remember things. It's because it's not like God has forgotten this sort of thing, of course. Now, we tend to forget. And because of that, it helps us to have God's word saying the same thing over and over again, that we might know it and we might remember it. We're also prone to try to make excuses for ourselves, to try to find a way to fix the situation when someone sins against us, and as if sinning against God is a proper way to fix anything. So we're reminded of what the truth is, how properly to deal with the situation, what God's law says on a given subject, so that when we are wronged, we don't try to find our own ideas to fix something. It would be like an example of that. If someone were to steal my car, now theft is wrong, it's wicked, it's evil. Then if I were to say, fine, someone stole my car, I'm just going to go steal someone else's car. Some people think like that. Two wrongs don't make it right. That's based in the law of God. We all heard that sort of thing, especially when we were younger. But it's like, well, you might try to justify it. Well, I need my car in order to get to work, and work is a good thing, and therefore you might justify some other sin that you're doing. No. My sin does not make the first sin right. It just makes it worse. So God repeats things because we are prone to forget.
There's also a lot of repetition in the Old Testament because, well, people are sinners and God is very forgiving. So people screw things up, God fixes it. People screw things up, God fixes it.
That's just what happens in Judges constantly.
Yes,
Notice that you read Judges, you're like, why is the same thing? And it is the same thing. It reminds us of God's forgiveness as well, absolutely. And that is extremely important. So repetition to remind us of the truth, because we're prone to forget it, remind us of God's forgiveness in it. Also to make sure people understand something. If you continue to say it, like, do you understand that? I said it once, if you say it one more time, make sure you got that. Helps for understanding. And because we're talking about scripture, this is important. Repetition is used for emphasis. You've heard us mention this before, Kip and I, from the pulpit and Sunday school classes, because in Hebrew thought, especially with the language, they don't have a comparative and a superlative form of a particular word like we do in English. If something is big, they don't have a bigger or big S. That's not how they say it. They might say if something is big. In other words, it's really big. Say it 3 times, it's the highest level of emphasis. You've heard of texts such as from Isaiah 6 or Revelation 4. When speaking of the attributes of God, God is not just holy, he's holy, holy, holy. It's the highest level of emphasis. No other attribute of God is raised to that level in Scripture, by the way, which should cause us to think that his holiness is something he really wants us to understand. So that repetition is used for emphasis. So repetition in text is good for the people of Israel. It's good for us, so that we can learn what God has said. The subjects are important, so we need to pay attention to them. So let's look at the first verse in our text this morning, simply putting it under the heading, do not pervert justice. Do not pervert justice. Exodus 23:6 says, you shall not pervert the justice due to your poor in his lawsuit. Not very creative with my titles. Let's slip right out of the text. I figured we're being safe, right? Do not pervert the justice due to the poor in his lawsuit. Now, it's important. The poor person, the truly poor person, is vulnerable in a lot of ways. it would be really easy to take advantage of it in a particular lawsuit situation. But before we get too far into that, we need to remind ourselves of something else. We need to remember what constitutes being poor in the Old Testament, in the Bible in general. Because if we don't define the term biblically, when the Bible speaks of something in a certain way and wants us to feel a certain way about it, have an opinion about how we're supposed to care for someone or how we're supposed to respond to a certain kind of sin, then if we're going to do it rightly, we need to know what the Bible means by it in the first place. Very frequently in modern vernacular, the terms are used, but we fill them with meaning that is not necessarily consistent with the Bible's meaning of them. It's a foreign concept. Call me that. That's that kind of thing. It happens all the time. It happens with the term poor. It happens with the term oppress. We visited that a little bit a few weeks ago. We're going to do so again this morning. So what's a good word, a synonym for what it means to be poor, if we're speaking biblically?
Destitute.
Perfect.
Hungry.
Yes.
Because if you're poor by biblical standards, you don't know where your next meal's coming from or when it's coming.
Or if you're going to have clothes on your back the next day, perhaps. Absolutely right. Destitute is a perfect word for that. In fact,
It
you guys,
reminds me of poor in spirit too.
yeah.
When you say poor.
And that's the Matthew 5. If we are poor in spirit, we realize that we are destitute before God, and we don't have anything that we can bring to Him that would cause Him to favor us. We have nothing. That's why we talk about the grace alone and the necessity of the grace of God. Jesus does everything. We have nothing to offer Him, except the sin that makes His forgiveness necessary. Right? Excellent illustration. And yes, the word destitute is perfect. To be destitute is to be without anything. You do not have the basic needs of life. You don't know where your next meal is coming from. The clothes on your back, if you have them, are falling apart and you need more. It's why in James chapter 2, when James talks about faith, like, you have faith, show me your faith by your deeds. If someone, by the way, if someone comes to you who does not have what? Clothes or daily food. And if you just say, oh, be warm, be well, like, what good is that? Like, no, if he has that and he comes to you, you're supposed to help him. We should desire to help such a person. And again, the fact that he mentions those two things, it's consistent with how the Bible views someone who's poor, if they don't have those things. So if you are having 3 meals a day and have smart devices and are complaining about being poor, maybe you should reevaluate yourself. Clothes and daily food, in fact, Paul talks about that. We'll be content with those things. Yeah.
I don't know how that works.
Also, it kind of speaks to the fact that a poor person to that extent, an appeal for justice might be their only hope.
Might be.
It's not like they have a lot of other options.
But because the person already doesn't have anything, the person is easily abused. If he's not knowing where his next meal is coming from, or how he's going to get clothes on his back, and he has a situation where he is being wronged, some unjust treatment has come to him, how easy would it be just to ignore him because he can't fight back anyway?
Yeah, just go away.
God says don't do that. You will not pervert it. He has justice that is due him. It is owed to him. God cares about this. You don't do injustice because it's easy to do injustice. No. It doesn't matter who it is. You follow justice. Condemning someone because he is poor is a gross miscarriage of justice. You'll notice I did the bold and the italicized on that. I put very particular emphasis there. They didn't have bold and italicized, I guess, in Hebrew script either. So that's why the repetition thing is important. He's poor, and therefore I'm not going to pay attention to his cry for mercy or his cry for justice. Wrong. Sin. Why? Because God says it's owed him. And what God says goes. Simple as that. We are expected to love those who are worse off than we are, or better off than we are.
I would say, whether you're poor or rich, you're still made in the image of God.
That. Exactly that. And God's justice is the standard for such things. It doesn't matter how much wealth you have or don't have. It doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is at all. It doesn't matter how old you are or how old you're not. Male, female, irrelevant. Justice is to be administered in the same way to everyone. And that is much the theme. These are things that we've already talked about in our text, even in chapter 23. Like I said, this is repetition. Earlier, it was last week and the week before, these verses came out. You shall not fall into the many to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit, siding with the many so as to pervert justice, nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit. This is kind of the other side of it as well. If you're being partial to the poor man, then what are you doing?
You're looking down on the rich man.
Because he's poor, that means should treat him with favoritism in the court of law. No. The standard of justice is the same. You don't treat him better because he's poor, and you don't treat him worse because he's poor. You don't treat the rich man better because he's rich, which is the temptation. Oh, maybe I can get something out of this. No. You do justice, but you don't treat him worse either. The law of God puts it on both sides. Like, no, it doesn't matter. You do justice.
The person's economic standing should not be a consideration.
Exactly.
I think the interesting part of this, though, is that there are certain things that a person can do that will make them poor, that are sinful lifestyle patterns.
Sure.
In the case where that's, for example, the New Testament says that if a man will not work, then do not let him eat either.
2 Thessalonians 3:10.
Right. So the idea there is that if the source of that person's poverty is that they're lazy and they don't want to work and they just want to mooch off the system, then let them starve.
Get a job. Work.
Their stomach will be their greatest advocate to getting to work. That will do that.
I know.
But even in that case, you're not looking at that person's poverty to determine whether or not the judgment, whether or not you should condemn them or whatever. You're looking at the source of that, the root cause of their poverty.
Certainly. Like
Because
an
it could
example,
be a catastrophe that caused their poverty.
it
An
could be,
earthquake or a house fire or something like that they had really no control over.
or even say it's not, and if someone were to come up and take a club and smack him on the head with it.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe he did something stupid to end up in poverty, but this person was evil to him and did something unjust to him. That
Oh, right,
person-
yeah. So the
Justice
crime
must be
is
done.
committed against
Right, the
them.
crime was committed against him, and you don't take whatever, not only his poverty, but honestly, whatever got him into the poverty is irrelevant at that point.
Yeah.
The action that the one man took against him, that is the issue, and that's the justice that needs to be pursued. Everything else disappears.
Right.
But you talked about this either last week or the week before with regard to pure democracies are very, very easily can do things, this sort of thing.
Right.
If you have a pure democracy, because then people can decide by majority vote to do
Permanent
injustice.
Yeah. And they do that a lot.
They do.
I mean, we have abortion laws, so
We do.
So
Or you got a bunch of people that decide they want to take everybody else's money. They can vote to do so
Yes,
through via taxation. Confiscatory taxation, let's call it that, shall we? I like to describe it this way. Democracy, a pure democracy, is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. The sheep ain't gonna make it. That's why republics are better than democracies, because you have protection for minority groups and interests in such things. But anyway, unscrupulous people can use the government and the majority rule principle to vote together to accomplish evil. And checks against them need to exist. The majority does not determine what is right. People want to say that it does, but then they're going to object to societies doing things that they consider evil. It doesn't work.
nobody actually believes that.
Right. No one actually believes it. They might use it as a particular argument, but they don't actually live like it, which means they don't really believe it. God's law sets the standard for it, and it doesn't matter how many side unjustly against the poor man or against the rich man. God's law determines what justice is, and we go by his standard regardless, end of discussion, because that's what it is. That's what justice is. This was John Jacob's favorite verse when he was in the legislature. Justice and only justice you shall follow, that you may live and inherit the land the Lord your God has given you. Justice. And what? Only justice. No exceptions. Do what is right. But no buts. We do what God has said and we trust him with the results. Because God is the one who's in control. And he is the one who blesses obedience. And even, not even I'm going to say if, even when we don't see things clearly enough to see the outcome of obeying God, given a situation in which we find ourselves, we still do what God has said, trusting that it is right and trusting that he will bless it. Not an if, but a when. God is not capricious, unlike the Muslim God, Allah. He is capricious. The one true God is not capricious. He does not change his mind. He always acts consistently with his character. So partiality then of any sort is, and carrying out justice is therefore not just, it is wicked, and it is sinful. Be it against a poor man, or a rich man, or anyone else in a particular category. Do justice and only justice. This one, we also have looked at.
It's kind of like chiasm.
Well, there you go. Chiasms are kind of cool. I'm not nearly as good at identifying as Jim Hamilton or even Jared, but chiasm is the X structure. The center part of the X structure is the main point, and it kind of moves into it and moves back out of it as you read through a particular text. this is doing that. Verse 7, keep far from a false charge. Does not make a false charge. Don't have anything to do with it. Keep far from it. Do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not acquit the wicked. All right? That kind of sounds like that, doesn't it? There's verse 1. There's the structure Kip was just talking about. This is a repetition again. False charges violate the 9th commandment. Do not bear false witness. Killing the innocent and righteous violates the 6th commandment. Do not murder. Now, again, we're in the context of the court of law. A lawsuit is brought against someone. An accusation has been brought against someone. How do you kill the innocent and righteous in a court of law? I mean, it happens.
We can convict them of a capital
False witness.
crime.
You have a false witness. You convict him of a capital crime, but they actually didn't do it. But a conviction is rendered against him because a false witness has come forward in some way, shape, or form and brought charges that were wrong, and that person therefore loses his life because of a liar.
And there's also the aspect of letting the guilty go unpunished, which
Yes.
this could be another thing. So do not spread a
touch on
false
that too.
report. So you spread a false report that somehow gets them exonerated or whatever. Then they go out, and then innocent people in society are affected negatively, whether it's they're killed, like the girl on the train, or many people have been bringing to life lately, or they're robbed, or they're property damage, whatever the case may be. Good morning.
Looks like there was a chair reserved for you. All right. And that is exactly right. And we're going to touch on an important aspect of that as well here in just a moment. But with regard to, let's see, all right, the innocent person. God is concerned with the truth of the matter, which flows from God's character. You cannot even have the concept of truth without our God. This is something that I enjoyed talking about in the apologetics class several months ago, because our God defines the concept of truth. To try to define truth in any other way outside of the one true God ends up making nonsense out of the concept of truth, because it just begs the question. Because you have to use a concept of truth that you already understand to try to define truth. If your definition is your conclusion and your argument contain the same thing, you're begging the question. So, I mean, you can prove that if you want. People talk about the various ways to demonstrate truth, pragmatic or coherence or correspondence views of truth. And all of them already assume the standard of knowing if something is true or not when they begin the argument. Truth is that which is consistent and conforms to the mind of God. Whatever God thinks about something, that is truth. God thinks, because he's over all, his omniscience is everything, and he is the one upholding the universe by the word of his power, Colossians chapter 1, Hebrews chapter 1. So right now, God thinks and is actualizing, of course, the fact that I'm holding this in my hand. Now I'm not, because that's how God is currently thinking about reality. That's how he's upholding reality. That is what the nature of truth is. And any other definition of it is going to beg the question. Which is kind of neat too, which means anytime someone says this is true, I don't care who the person is or how vehemently they're going to try to deny the existence of God. If you say this is true, you've just invoked my God out of necessity.
It's my truth.
That just means I believe.
Or I feel
People use that phrase, right? Well, this is my truth and that's truth. Okay, here, all that means is you believe this and I believe something else. That's what that means.
I just had to do that.
Sure, that's fine. But a proper response to that might well be, well, so what?
Right?
Big deal. So what? If someone else thinks something else, why should I take what you think over what someone else thinks? If all it is your opinion, I mean, that and a few extra dollars might get you a cup of coffee somewhere. But in fact, if you give some certain opinions, they might charge you more for it. Who knows? But in any case, truth. And Jesus talks about this with regard to truth. Why is God so concerned about truth? Because God doesn't just tell the truth. God is truth. This is why God is so concerned with that. Why he wants honesty in the court of law. Why justice is expected to be done. Because God's very character, his very nature is truth. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. John Gill comments on it and rightly says, Jesus is not only true, he is truth itself. Which is why we need to be lovers of truth. Which is why the 9th commandment is so important. Which is why the whole basis of the Sunday school lesson and what we were talking about for the last couple of weeks is rooted in you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor because God is truth and therefore God hates injustice and therefore so is we. That all flows from God's character. No false charges, truth and justice only. Oh, and the penalty, by the way, you mentioned this before, is something that really needs to be fixed in our own justice system. I haven't asked anybody to read anything yet. If someone wanted to grab Deuteronomy 19:16 through 20, this text is so important. Because with everything that's being said about how witnesses are supposed to be honest and not bear false witness and not seek to use the court of law to execute somebody, what happens if you have a malicious witness, a lying witness come forward? Deuteronomy 19,
16 through 20
16 through 20.
says, if a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in office in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and the rest shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit any such evil among you.
Wow. Talk about a deterrent for false accusations.
Get rid of that Me Too thing.
Oh, yeah.
Indeed. Now, this is also not something capricious or something that is taken lightheartedly. You think you have a false witness? What happens? You have the priests and the judges who are in office. They're going to examine and investigate thoroughly. There's a trial for the false witness. But if he's found to be a false witness, like you brought charges against this man, and if he were convicted, he would have been put to death.
Well, it has to be a malicious false witness
Yes.
as well. It's possible.
Hence the
somebody's
word
mistaken.
malicious.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the very beginning, a malicious witness, someone who was intending to do it. It's one thing to get your facts wrong. I didn't know. I was told this, or I thought this. I was mistaken. Okay. But if you're actually trying to use the justice system against our text this morning, you will not do this. You will not use it to try to kill the innocent. If they're found to do something like that maliciously, all right, to the chopping block with you. You were trying to acquire his wealth, and you said he stole something from you. You still had it. No one stole it. So now you get to pay him the value of it.
Say you're going to a rock concert. What did you say?
Yeah, rock concert. Yeah.
If they're right side, it's stop moving.
This needs to be restored and implemented in our own justice system. That would pretty much eliminate false accusations if it were actually carried out. And it would save a lot of trouble in a lot of
Get
ways.
rid of a lot of liars.
It would get rid of a lot of liars. Innocent people would much less often go to jail. The court system would probably clear up significantly. All the backlog they have because of a lot of things. You know what? Am I really sure about this accusation? Did he really do this? You're going to want to be more careful.
I'm not on trial here. But
Yes, you
should
are.
be. You should be.
Yes, you are. Your honesty is required in order to make an accusation. And if you are doing because you're angry with someone and wanting to harm that person, oh, watch out. The justice system should be a two-edged sword.
It's optional.
Anyway, what's the next one? Verse 8.
I have a question on part of verse 7.
Huh?
It says, "For I will not acquit the guilty." Is God talking about the final judgment?
Ultimately, it's going to have to be that. God doesn't acquit the guilty, even if some injustice is carried out in this land. And this is, thank you, I meant to mention that. That's an excellent point. A principle that we also need to keep in mind with regard to the justice system. God is more concerned about, he wants more. If someone truly is innocent, that person would go free rather than someone who truly is guilty to be convicted. Does that make sense? If you have a situation, you don't have enough evidence, or you have someone who really is guilty and through due process, he wasn't convicted because the evidence just wasn't there for it, he's going to walk in the court. But that's better than an innocent person being convicted. Because the end of verse 7,
It's the lesser of two evils.
something like that. But God doesn't want the innocent person condemned. He's more concerned about that, shall we say. Because, so say the guilty person goes free. You know what? God didn't forget. He knows what was going on.
Oh, yeah.
You think you're going to get away from the ultimate justice? That's not how that works.
Conviction might have been mercy.
Maybe, again, if he doesn't repent and he thinks he's getting off scot-free, it's like,
Right.
buddy, you are wrong. Judgment day is coming and God has remembered. But this is part of the problem in our own justice system right now. Because we live in a society where people have not trusted God to carry out ultimate justice. they insist upon, something has to be done in the justice system. We have to get some sort of a conviction out of this because something needs to be done because this person did wrong. Well, no, you might be convicting an innocent person, and that's horrible. We don't want that. But even if the person who's guilty walks, okay, well, you just wait because God has justice and it's coming. As Christians, we can hope for that. And we ought to, because of texts like this. But our society doesn't have hope like that.
Right, we don't have to look to the state as God, as final,
Exactly.
as a final say, either in anything, to provide for us, welfare or whatever, or to provide for us justice, because ultimately the state's gonna fail, the government's gonna fail at some point, they're flawed systems. And we have faith in God that he will not acquit the guilty.
Exactly. He will make it right on the last day. And no one's going to escape that. He doesn't forget, unlike us. Verse 8, you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of those who are in the right. Bribe being
It could be anything.
Paying?
Money, favors,
something in order to sway someone's particular decision.
political support.
They're giving money, they're giving property, they're giving favors or whatever in order to try to influence a decision. In this case, a case of justice. God does not like that. Makes it really a whole lot easier to be a malicious witness, doesn't it? If you bring a little money along with it and try to persuade the judge to rule in favor. Sure
Like
does.
politicians who take money or gifts.
Exactly.
So the question is, somebody who takes a bribe, are they considered at that point a malicious witness, one who's perverting justice? Would that be fall in the same
That's a
category?
great question. I would have to think that someone who's offering a bribe to do that will be found guilty in some way and be carried along with it.
Or the person who accepts the bribe is what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, if you're
Yeah.
doing that, then you're a wicked judge, and that has other ramifications.
Yeah.
But the Bible recognizes the usefulness of bribes.
Sure.
Proverbs are like, oh yeah, bribe is a magic stone in the eyes of the one who gives it. Wherever he turns, he prospers. So I'm giving a bribe, I'm going to get my way. Now, having said that,
Is there more to that verse then?
this verse, no, but there's more to this chapter. That's an important question. Proverbs is simply stating the reality of the situation. It recognizes what happens when people give bribes.
It's a description.
This is a description because you ask the question, does it follow that because a bribe can do such things, that it is acceptable to do such things? It does not follow, neither logically nor biblically. How do we know that? Because all you have to do is keep reading, and you have your answer. The wicked accepts a bribe in secret to pervert the ways of justice. That look familiar? That last part of that verse there? Yeah, it's Exodus 23. There it is. Going back to the law, if you take Deuteronomy, just go a verse prior to the one we cited before. You shall not pervert justice. There it is again. You shall not show partiality. You shall not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and subverts the cause of the righteous. No, don't do it. You will not take a bribe to pervert justice. No. Now, does it mean that any bribe of any kind is always wicked in every circumstance? And notice I use those words intentionally. I don't think so necessarily.
Emphasize.
I'm emphasizing them, right? Capital letters, except the Hebrew script was all capital letters, so they couldn't do that either. But I have a caps lock, so. No, I don't think so necessarily. You could, I think, have a situation in many parts of the world, this can and does happen, where the justice system is flipped on its head. And you have someone who was trying to do something good and right, but the official is corrupt, so a bribe is offered to get him to do the right thing.
I've heard people smuggling Bibles into
Yeah,
China, for
and
example.
bribing officials to overlook the fact that you're carrying a case of Bibles into a communist country. Is that appropriate? Sure. But that's not the case of a court of law where justice is being perverted. This is the kind of bribe that is absolutely prohibited. You will
You know-
not give money to sway a judicial decision to violate the cause of the just. No.
What's interesting about that is you got to kind of think, okay, so is it wrong? It's obviously not wrong for the Christian to do it to get the Bibles in, but is it wrong for the corrupt official to receive the bribe to let the Bibles in?
The question should be backed up one more. It's wrong for the corrupt official to be corrupt in the first place.
There
He
you
shouldn't
go,
be
yeah.
stopping him from letting the Bibles
I
come
mean,
through.
when he sees the Bible, he should say, "Yeah, "Go ahead."
Exactly. That's exactly what he ought to do.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be having to take money for it. The
Yeah,
fact that he has to take money
He
for
should
it is,
defy that wicked law that doesn't allow it. Yeah.
so the fact that he has to be bribed to do what's right, that's his sin.
Do you think on some level, and this is just pure speculation, on some level, people who are raised and live like in a communist country, there's like a level of mercy, understanding that that's all they know. So it would be one thing that maybe if they knew that this was corrupt, to not allow the proliferation of ideas and beliefs, or maybe it's just all they know.
That's an interesting question, and if it comes to the subject of are there levels of judgment, even an eternal judgment, that people are going to be suffering and enduring because of, I suppose, the amount of light that they've received, you might say. And I would have to say to some degree, yes. It doesn't mean that what they're doing is not sin, because it is, and God will punish sin. But it's another thing if you have someone who's had gospel preaching to him for 20 years and remains hardened against it. He's sinning against all of that light. Will he not receive a greater judgment? I think he will. But a text that I appeal to on this in some cases is when Jesus was talking about the man who was leading one of the little ones who believe in him to sin. That person should have a millstone tied around his neck and thrown into the sea because he's leading someone into sin. That's wicked and terrible. The communist leader over this person would be liable of much more judgment than the one who's simply parroting the mantras he's been taught for his entire life. But it also, something in that same text, when Jesus says that, causes one of these little ones who what? Believes in me to do what? To sin. The one who causes it is guilty of a greater sin, but the little one is still sinning in some degree. And to the degree, then that has to be reckoned. And that is what the scriptures tell us. Now, are there different levels of punishment as a result? I believe so. To what extent? I'm not sure. The Bible doesn't go into it with a whole lot of depth.
Be beaten with many lashes as opposed to
Yes,
beaten
many
with
lashes
few
as opposed to not as many. Yes. Another example.
That's,
What exactly will that look like? I don't know. Because the Bible doesn't tell us a whole lot of detail. It just compares them and gives us illustrations like Kip just said.
Is that like speak to like layers of hell or something? I've heard people say that, and how true it is, we don't know. But
well, I mean, I
don't
wouldn't
think
take Dante's Inferno as a roadmap.
Yeah,
of
course not.
But,
It's
but
pure
you can't
it's
say-
good reading. It's fun reading.
Yeah, you can't say specifically different layers or exactly what hell is going to look like, but someone has said this with regard to it. Might have been a Puritan. I mentioned this, I think, to Sam when we were out preaching yesterday. That the most glorious thing about heaven is that God is there. The most fearful thing about hell is that God is there.
Yeah.
In heaven, you experience the fullness of His grace and mercy and love and compassion. In hell, you experience His wrath and judgment to its fullest, and that's it. That's fearful. To what degree will that be, or what will that look like? Again, I'm not sure. We have images, and we have multiple ashes. We have images of the lake of fire. We have images of eternal suffering and torment. But how that's going to be parsed out, the scriptures don't give us a ton of information, so I'm just going to have to stop there. Where the scriptures stop, I got to stop, because otherwise I'm speculating. Sure. Last but not least, before we finish up, well, maybe this is the fewest number of slides here anyway. You shall not oppress a sojourner. You know, the heart of a sojourner, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. We covered this exactly a few weeks ago in 22:1. You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. Almost exactly the same. Once again, hey, this is important. God's going to say it again. You were a sojourner. You know what it's like to wander in a land that is not your own. They are in a land that is not their own, and you will not oppress them. A sojourner is someone who is in a land for a short period of time. He's going to go back to his own land, presumably, unless he becomes a native of the land. That's Exodus 12. We talked about that as well. So we know what a sojourner is. What does it mean to oppress someone? We talked about this as well. Oppression is not someone having more money than you. Oppression is not having a different skin tone from someone else. That is stupid. Oppression, as the Bible talks about it, you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You were oppressed there. What was happening to them in Egypt? They were enslaved and beaten and treated cruelty with no hope of release. Okay, that's oppression.
That would be an illegitimate form of slavery.
Yes.
One that is, yeah, I don't know.
And some of the texts that we talked about a few weeks ago, another kind of oppression. Maybe you recall, maybe you don't. If you don't, I'll say it anyway. Robbing someone out of their belongings and what they need to survive, that's oppression. Using the court system against a poor man because he's poor, that's oppression. Not paying a worker what you owe him, making him work for you for free, that's oppression. These are all biblical examples of that. So again, people want to be down on people who are being oppressors. We hear that word a lot. Okay, well and good. What does it mean? Why is it bad? What does the Bible say about it? Because a very common concept of godless people these days is to take words that are known pejoratives, and rightly so, a pejorative, a term that carries with it a negative connotation, bad associations, that sort of thing. words like oppress, or even words like racism, or we've talked about a few other ones. Fascist. Oh boy, yeah, that. But and they take these words, but they fill them with foreign meaning. They want to maintain the pejorative nature of the term. We don't want people to be oppressors. Well, no, we don't. The Christian thinks, because he's speaking biblically. We don't want people to go without their food, or employers not to pay them, or people to be enslaved, or that we don't want the court system used against people. That's oppression. That's not what they mean. They fill it through meaning.
You're speaking out against my beliefs.
You're oppressing me.
You're oppressing me.
No, that's not how that works. You see how that happens? That's actually a common thing that happens with regard to false religions too. There has been a huge spike in Mormons these days, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, especially after the Mormon church got destroyed in Wisconsin, Minnesota, I forget. But I mean, somebody go in there, shot people up, and burn the place down. Okay, that was evil. That guy needs to be executed for his crimes because it was wicked. It was murderous. But there's been a huge rise in Mormon apologists, amateur or professional, trying to insist that we are Christians as well, just like you. You can't say that we're not Christians. After all, we're the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Except they have the same vocabulary, but a different dictionary. Jesus is not the eternal one true God in Mormonism. In fact, the God of this world, Elohim as they call it, the Heavenly Father, is not the eternal one true God. According to Joseph Smith, which, let's see, the King Follett Discourse, King Follett Funeral Discourse, where he brought this out most clearly, the nature of God and the nature of man are the same. I mean, Adam is considered to be the God of this world in Mormonism. Didn't know that. What? Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But they also believe that we are of one and the same nature as God over this world. That if we, going by their law of eternal progression, we can eventually become gods ourselves.
Makes complete sense that Adam is the king of the world, because all who are in Adam, well, you know.
Their God is not eternal. Their God did not create out of nothing. He simply rearranged pre-existing matter. Their God did not create by a miracle Jesus in the womb of the Virgin Mary, but rather Elohim, their Heavenly Father, actually came down to Mary, who was one of his spirit daughters, and actually had physical relations with her, and that's how Jesus was conceived. All these kinds of things are what Mormon doctrine teaches, and they are blasphemous. They are not biblical Christianity. First and foremost being that Mormonism is the most polytheistic religion in the history of the world, and Christianity, biblical Christianity, flatly states there is but one true God. And that's kind of a big deal. But yet, they insist on they're being the same religion, and they're just not. Let's just give them a catalyst for it. Again, similar situation. Same terminology, different dictionary, and we need to be aware of that. Anywho, that's talk about oppression.
Something else that comes to my mind, if you're in the foreign land and you go to the marketplace to get what you need, the people that live there could treat the sojourner or the foreigner wrongly, charging them too much, or maybe refusing to sell to them. I mean, that could be a type of oppression too.
Yeah. Now, if they do so, no. But it could happen. All right. Well, let's pray, since it is 10 o'clock, and we should all be over there now. Father God, thank you for this wonderful day. Thank you for the lesson this morning, for your word and the truth of it, and what it exhorts us to and reminds us of what the nature of justice is. That you are the God of truth. I pray that our lives will be conformed to that. We love you, love our neighbor. Hold fast to that which is true. May we worship you all in spirit and truth as we go to worship now. Glory of your great name, and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Now I need to. It looks like I've already decorated for Easter. They'll just keep scared out of your chickens, isn't that? That's so cool.
The next
The
one is
different
Santa
colored eggs.
Claus.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all cool.
We got a bunch of Americans,
Oh, yeah.
but they're not letting it through nothing.
That's really cool. I did not